السلام عليكم.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم، والحمد لله رب العالمين. نحمده ونستعينه ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونستنصره ونستجيره ونستهديه ونستشيره، فإنا نشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وإنه حق من هداه الله فلا مضل له، ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى محمد النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين، خاتم الرسل والأنبياء أجمعين، وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين، وعلى أصحابه المختارين، وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم إنا نبتهل إليك ونرجوك، فنسألك أن تقسم لنا من خشيتك ما يحول بيننا وبين معاصيك، وأن تقسم لنا من رحمتك ما يقربنا من طاعتك، ونسألك أن ترزقنا من اليقين ما يهون علينا مصائب الدنيا وأحداثها. لا إله إلا أنت. In recent days, there have been a number of events, things taking place that warrant attention and deserve consideration. And it is often somewhat of a challenge to think of what deserves mention first and what deserves mention second. But I think in terms of the long-term impact on Muslims worldwide, and in terms of the long-term impact on the identity struggles within Islam itself, and on the projected courses of Islamic thought and Islamic ideals and Islamic normativities. What deserves prominence in terms of mention and discussion, it has now become confirmed through the venues of the Saudi government itself, widely reported and widely advertised by the Saudi government, what is commonly referred to as the Mukaab project in Saudi Arabia. While I think most Muslims are aware of the term Kaaba, which basically literally reads as cube, referring to the Islamic Kaaba, the center of the faith. The word Mukaab, or the squared, comes from the same root. And the Mukaab project, as I'm sure most of you have heard, is part of the Saudi government's vision for the new Saudi Arabia. They're building a cube that has an eerie resemblance to the actual Kaaba, except that the Mukaab, instead of the Kaaba, is going to have a golden exterior. It's going to be 400 meters wide and long. And within or inside the Mukaab, there will be space for 100,000 residential units, 9,000 hotel rooms, 1.4 million square meters of office space, as well as dozens of entertainment venues. Importantly, the Mukaab project is a virtual reality experiment, or a virtual reality project. You step into this closed off area, isolated from the natural environment, to literally a concrete mega city. And once you step into this concrete mega city, you no longer feel that you are in either Saudi Arabia or in the desert at all. Everything within the Mukaab project, instead of the Kaaba, the Mukaab project, is designed for a totally submersive experience. An experience in which you imagine yourself to be living in a future world, a world of flying cars, endless gardens, and along all the technological wizardry that is supposed to transport your perceptions, your psychology, yourself into a virtual world is endless opportunities for shopping and entertainment. But particularly for the advertising of commodities and for one form of commodity consumption or another, whether immediate consumption in the form of expensive restaurants and dining venues, or other commodities in terms of everything technological or everything that can be worn as adornment and for the purpose of an image. Alongside now the confirmation that in fact Saudi Arabia is going ahead with building this grandiose architectural plan of the Mukaab, the Emirat just this week launched its long-awaited or long-announced House of Ibrahim alayhi salam, the Abrahamic house. The project houses a synagogue, a church, and a mosque. But these are symbolic structures because alongside the synagogue, the church, the mosque, is a virtual museum for the so-called Abrahamic faith. The mosque is named after the current Sheikh of Azhar, Ahmad al-Tayyib. It is known as the Ahmad al-Tayyib Mosque. The synagogue is named after Maimonides, Musa ibn Maymun. And in the shared space between the synagogue, the church, the mosque, are what the Emirati government described as spaces that offer people the opportunity to contemplate the unified truth, the Unitarian truth of the three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. What is ironic about the Abrahamic house is that after the Emirati government had announced that it will name the mosque after the current Sheikh of Azhar, Ahmad al-Tayyib, Ahmad al-Tayyib, few months ago, gave a very well publicized, or at least well known, speech in which he condemned the attempt by those he did not name. He didn't name who those people are, but he condemned the effort by an unnamed party to create a new religion known as the Abrahamic faith, in which all three religions are diluted into a single faith, a faith that requires the most concessions and the most corruptions from Islam, while it does not transgress upon the boundaries of Christianity or Judaism too much, because it doesn't make demands upon them to recognize the prophecy of Muhammad alayhi salam, and it doesn't expect from them any concessions as to the truthfulness of the Prophet of Islam, and displays in the shared space between the mosque, the synagogue, and the church, no references are made to the truth of Muhammad, or indeed to what makes the Islamic faith unique. Plenty of references are made basically demanding of Muslims that they accept the truth of the two other religions. And Sheikh al-Azhar, in this talk or in this lecture, it was a very public lecture, he warned that there are powerful parties and powerful interests behind the attempt to create this new theology, in quotes, of tolerance, because it is tolerant of only particular things and certain things. And while the Emirati government says that the shared space between the mosque, the church, and the synagogue, the Emirati government describes the space as an opportunity for people to contemplate the truth of Ibrahim. And who was Ibrahim? Alayhi salam, of course. No reference is made in this shared space of what in Surah Al-Imran, what Surah Al-Imran explicitly says about the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. ما كان إبراهيم يهوديا ولا نصرانيا. That the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was not a Jew and was not a Christian, but a Muslim. And in fact, we know that, for instance, in Surah Al-Imran, right before Allah says that, Allah takes Jews and Christians to task and tells them, on what basis do you claim ownership of the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam? He was neither a Christian nor a Jew, but clearly a Hanif Muslim. In the shared space, in this compound built by the Emirat, no reference is made of this Quranic verse. But also, there is no reference of what Jews believe about Jesus and believe about Muhammad. It is well established that for centuries, Jewish sources clearly accuse Maryam of being a fornicator and of having Jesus out of wedlock. There is no belief in the Immaculate Birth. And as to Muhammad, there is no mention of the fact that for centuries, Muhammad ranges in Jewish sources. There is a range from describing him as just an impostor and a charlatan and a liar to a demon-possessed, evil human being. There is also no mention in this shared space of the fact that while Jesus is a child born out of wedlock, a brash and snobbish and arrogant child who defied his pious elders and who was obsessed with, who had an inflated ego that drove him to rebel against his rabbinic authorities. And while in Christian sources, Jesus is the Son of God and indeed part of God or an embodiment of God or whatever the different theological interpretations of who Jesus was, both Jewish sources and Christian sources have consensus that Muhammad alayhi salam was nothing but an impostor and a liar and a charlatan. But you see, this is precisely the point. The Quran describes the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam as neither a Jew nor a Christian, but a Muslim, and undercuts the entire Abrahamic project from its very roots by telling Jews and Christians, you have no claim over Ibrahim because you've corrupted the essence of monotheism. And what Ibrahim was about was Tawheed. And while the Emirati effort strains not to address what Jews say about al-Masih alayhi salam, and strain not to address the way that all the three religions strongly disagree about the prophecy of al-Masih, of Jesus alayhi salam, and strain not to address what Jews and Christians say about Muhammad, yet it invites humanity to contemplate theology and to reach some type of overlapping consensus about points of iman and faith and theology. But in doing so, it completely misses the boat. It completely misses the boat. It is precisely because when it comes to matters of theology that we cannot agree, it is precisely because when it comes to matter of theology that we cannot agree, we have to learn to respect each other's differences. and to respectfully agree to disagree. And what is it then that we can focus our overlapping consensus about? If we cannot agree about who Jesus was, and we cannot agree about who Ibrahim was, and we cannot agree about who Muhammad was, what is it that we are supposed to come together on as followers of different theological truth? We are supposed to come together on exactly this type of things that the Emiratis don't want us to come together on. Achieving some type of strained and forced and false theological consensus that is premised on denying of historical truth and denying of literal texts, and indeed denying of theology as a quest for truth. But what we can come together on is the fact that, according to the Secretary General of the United Nations, the fact that the Secretary General of the United Nations just said that 2023 is going to be the worst year in human history in terms of famines. The Secretary General and UNESCO both warned that there are currently 34 countries in the world, 34 countries, that are on the verge of a famine. Allah doesn't expect us to come to some type of miraculous consensus on Ibrahim or Jesus or Muhammad alayhi salam jamia. But precisely because we can't agree on fine points of theology and ultimate truth, what does Allah expect us to come together on? To address painful facts, painful challenges that confront all of humanity, like the fact that there are 34 countries on the verge of famine in 2023. Like the fact that in 2023, there is a record number of displaced human beings, a record number of refugees and displaced people who are living in extremely precarious and dangerous conditions. We are supposed to come together over the fact that in 2023, there is a record number of human beings that have been trafficked and continue to live in sexual and labor slavery around the world. There is indeed, in 2023, a record number of Muslims who have been processed by human traffickers than any time in recorded history. More Muslim women who have been abducted, sexually assaulted, sold into sexual slavery than any other time in recorded history. You see, the Abrahamic house is another exercise in deception, falsehood. The dictator wants to continue living in the realm of despotism and injustice. They want to continue on making Dubai and Abu Dhabi the playground of the rich and corrupt. They want to continue making Dubai and Abu Dhabi the capital of the world for human trafficking and for trafficked people from around the world, while gripping poverty is eating away at the fabric of countries like Yemen, Libya, Egypt, Sudan, Somalia, Eritrea, and hence a record number of Muslim women go to Dubai and go to Abu Dhabi to prostitute themselves. Or quite often, and more often, they are forced into prostitution because they are tempted, enticed to go to Dubai or Abu Dhabi by being offered a work contract only to discover upon arrival that there is no work, it's prostitution. And while the Emirati government wants the rest of humanity to look the other way as it does what it does, it wants you to focus on the Abrahamic house. An Abrahamic house that is built on lies. Again, I emphasize, it is precisely because we cannot agree on matters of conviction and belief. Who was Jesus? Who was Moses? Who was Ibrahim? Who was Muhammad alayhi salam? That we must learn to respect each other's differences and get over it. Get beyond it. And what do we focus on? We focus on human good, human goodness. We focus on ihsan. We focus on alleviating and removing pain and harm. We focus on taking care of those who need to be taken care of and those who must be taken care of. Not pretending that Ibrahim was neither Muslim nor Christian nor Jew, but was all of them. Not pretending that we can possibly believe the same things about Jesus, or that possibly what you believe about Muhammad and what I believe about Muhammad alayhi salam doesn't really make a difference. No, it makes a great deal of difference. But I respect your right to believe in what you believe in, as you respect my right to believe in what I believe in, and we get down to business, the business of morality, the business of ihsan, the business of goodness on earth. The fact of the matter is, and I should note before I forget, that it was quite noticeable that although the mosque that has just opened in the Abrahamic compound was named after Sheikh Ahmad al-Tayyib, Sheikh of Azhar, rector of Azhar, he did not attend the opening ceremonies. And as I said months ago, he warned the world that certain powers in this world want to replace the religion of Islam with the Abrahamic faith. A faith, although he didn't say it, but I will say it, a faith that is not troubled by despotism, a face that is not troubled by the coercion of Muslim women into prostitution, a face that is not troubled by coexisting with the number of human beings who suffer utter misery all around us in the world. The Emirat announced, for instance, that in response to the earthquake, it was sending 9 airplanes full of aid every day. Well, it turns out that the Emirati aid was not being sent to UN aid organizations, or in fact to any aid organization, but was being sent directly to the Syrian government. And the Syrian government was turning around and selling the aid it receives from the Emirat in its open markets, that you would go to Damascus and you would find products marked as Emirati aid sold in Syrian markets. The Emiratis were using the opportunity, this occasion of the earthquake, as an opportunity to score political points with the Syrian government. And the Syrian government was using the opportunity to make money off Emirati aid. And people trapped under the ruins in the north of Syria continue to die. And those who live in tents in extreme weather conditions continue to suffer. The Emirati wants you to go to the Abrahamic house, look at the nice pictures, look at the nice quote, praise Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad and Ibrahim all together without identifying any religion that is privileged with the truth. And then mind your own business and don't dare comment in any critical fashion about how the Emirat, like the rest of the Arab world and the rest of the Muslim world, are not doing what they're supposed to do to help the victims of the earthquake. In other words, when it comes to real moral issues, mind your own business and leave it up to those who are in power. You concern yourself with the little make-believe world that we offer you. But you see, here is precisely another really critical point. The Emirati government wants to construct a world of artificial truth. Artificial truth. When it comes to history and theology, wants you to ignore the empirical facts of human suffering and focus your attention on the religious truth that they artificially provided you with. But this is precisely the same paradigm of the Mukaab of Saudi. Truth is not people suffering. Truth is not what the Israelis are doing to Palestinians. Truth is not the 50,000 people plus who've lost their lives and hundreds of thousands more who are unhoused or destitute. Truth is not the thousands upon thousands of women and children and men who are enslaved in the Emirat and Saudi and the Gulf countries generally. Truth is none of that. Truth is the virtual reality we create for you. The ultimate divine complex of the despot. When the despot says, "Ana rabbukumul a'la," I am your God. What is the despot? The ultimate goal of the despot. The despot wants to tell you, you don't see with your own eyes. You don't hear with your own ears. You don't smell with your own nose. And you don't think with your own brain. I tell you what you see, what you hear, and what you should think. And your job is to obey. And this is precisely the extremely unmistakable and powerful message from the Kaaba to the Mukaab. The Kaaba, a very humble structure, built by the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salatu wassalam, and his son Ismail alayhi salatu wassalam, and honored and preserved through the ages. But the Kaaba is brutally honest. No building was allowed to be built around the Kaaba taller than the Kaaba. When you stand in the space of the Kaaba, no authority, no political authority is supposed to negotiate the space by artificial architect and by artificial constructs. No political authority is supposed to come and provide you a fancy roof with architectural engravings. No political authority was supposed to come and dazzle you with the glory of the space. For centuries, Islamic law insisted on the plainness of the space of the Kaaba. Have you ever wondered why there aren't calligraphy all around the mosque and the Kaaba? Have you ever wondered why the Kaaba maintained this humble image throughout the centuries? Because of a part of your tradition that has been thoroughly erased from your mind. Centuries of scholars, they said it is haram to embellish the appearance of the Kaaba in any way. That space is between you and Allah, unmediated, unnegotiated, uncorrupted by a political authority. The Saudi government, first, in symbolism that is unmistakable, MBS comes in with his forces, empties the Kaaba, and stands on top of the Kaaba in an image that no one can ever forget, as if to say, I am achieving dominance over the Kaaba. If this offends you, then tough luck. I am supreme, and the Kaaba is under my feet. And of course, as usual, Muslims put their head in the sand and ignored it. Next came the fancy buildings that eclipsed the Kaaba. For centuries, there is those who love to talk about ijma' about this and ijma' about that. Well, how about the ijma' of centuries that no building can be constructed in this space that is taller than the Kaaba, and that you can't change the character of Mecca, its basic humility and its basic plainness before Allah. So next came the towering clock, the five-star hotels, all the razzle and dazzle that eclipsed the Kaaba and made the Kaaba architecturally insignificant next to the towering buildings that surround it. But then, to drive the point even home, and even to a greater extent, there is now a new Kaaba called the Mukaab in Saudi, a shrine of gold. It looks like a golden cube from the outside, or will look. Literally, a shrine for virtual reality, consumerism, and consumption. Everything that delights the senses, everything that will allow you to forget that you are in the desert and that you are in a place that is arid and hot. You will step in this space and you will be in utter awe, not of God's ability, not of God's nature, but in utter awe of what petrodollars can do, and in utter awe of what the Saudi government can accomplish with its money. And the reality that you live will be defined by the Saudi government. In other words, a shrine for falsehood and lies. MBS said in his vision of the future Saudi Arabia and Project Neom, the mega city in the desert, that he is convinced that Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states are the Europe of tomorrow. Now, of course, he doesn't understand that it is not the nightclubs, it's not the bars, it's not the dance venues, it's not the rock groups, it's not all the nakedness and promiscuity that makes Europe what Europe is. Europe became Europe because of the culture, the thought, the science, the education, the invention. What he means when he says that Saudi Arabia will become the Europe of tomorrow is the only model he is aware of, and that is the model of Dubai and Abu Dhabi. So indeed, we see that the Mukaab in Riyadh and Project Neom that is being built in the desert is modeled after the experience in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. The playground of the rich and filthy. Not the filthy rich, but the rich and filthy. A playground that has become the Mecca of the sex industry, the Mecca of labor exploitation, the Mecca of systematic human rights violations, the Mecca that says if you have money, you have power, you're immune from all moral and ethical standards. There's only one problem. That this is being accomplished in the homeland of the Prophet ﷺ. that the insanity of the tyrannical government is being born in the land purified by our Prophet ﷺ. Jabal Uhud is being currently destroyed to build a medical center. The Ministry of Entertainment, just this last week in Saudi Arabia, announced that it will build the first nightclubs in Medina. Nightclubs serving quote unquote halal alcohol, whatever that means, in Medina. And still, Muslims exist in utter obliviousness. Despite of it all, with everything that I've talked about, you follow and you monitor Muslim discourses of the young and upcoming generation, and you find that it is completely disconnected from any of these extremely critical historical challenges that confront Muslims and the future of Muslims. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم وأسأل الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. If you are intent in allowing your reality to be constructed for you, then it is your moral obligation to ask yourself, who is doing the construction? The challenges that confront us as Muslims is not just the Kaaba and the Mukaab, the announcement of the new faith and new religion, the Abrahamic house or the house of Abraham and the Abrahamic religion as it's often referred to. But even closer to home, there hardly passes a week without Allah testing us time and time again with the same basic, essential question of where is your moral consciousness? We all know that Israel has just announced plans to confiscate or to build 7,000 new residential compounds or new residential spaces, annexing more Palestinian land. We know that it has even the typically apologetic American government that bends backwards and forwards to ignore Israeli offenses and atrocities, was forced to acknowledge, the current administration was forced to acknowledge that it is concerned that Israel is unlawfully completing its annexation of the West Bank. 7,000 new housing units in the West Bank. We also know that just this last week, in a bizarre operation, Israel murdered 11 Palestinians and injured 100 more. Most of those that were injured, most of those 100 that were injured, were actually injured with bullets. In other words, they were shot by Israeli soldiers. Incidentally, there's a story that is extremely painful about a Palestinian medic who rushed to save the life of an elderly gentleman shot by the Israelis. And then after the man died, the medic looked at the man's face and realized it was his father and started wailing and saying, "My father is dead." Among those who were killed by Israelis and those shot were elderly people in their 70s and in their mid-60s and early 60s, and of course a whole bunch of young people. Now, of course, and as usual, there are hardly any consequences. In fact, there are no consequences for whatever Israel does to Palestinians. No one even bothers with condemnations in the human rights, in the UN anymore. No real consequences when it comes to the world of human rights. The Human Rights Council of the UN doesn't say anything. The General Secretary doesn't bother saying much anymore. Everyone in the world recognizes, sadly, that not just Palestinians, but in my view, pretty much Muslims have become the sacrificial exception to the normativities of human rights. You can do whatever you want to Muslims, but incidentally, like for instance, just this last week, food supplies to Rohingya refugees was cut by 1/3. The United Nations said the reason we cut food aid to Rohingya refugees by 1/3 is because there are not enough donations. So while Saudi Arabia is spending billions of dollars on building a virtual reality Mukaab in the desert, the Rohingyas are starving to death and growing ever more vulnerable to human traffickers and traders in human organs, simply because people are not giving or countries are not giving. But in the midst of all of this, the United States overhauls in years, reworks and rewrites some of its foreign aid law. And they made a big to-do of the fact that in the redrafting of the foreign aid law, the US strengthened the language that says the United States shall not sell arms or technology to systematic, consistent human rights abuses. But there is a legislative exception. Israel shall not be deemed a human rights abuser. The law should not define facts. The law is supposed to define standards. But the executive branch and the legislative branch have basically said to Israel, continue stealing lands, continue killing Palestinians. No matter what, we will never consider you a human rights abuser. At the same time, a school like George Washington does something that is truly confounding. George Washington University. it does not allow its university members, including its members who are in the medical profession, to provide counseling assistance to Palestinians traumatized by Israeli violence. So, when Israel assaulted Gaza, a Palestinian mental health student who had family in Palestine decided to work to create a hotline to provide counseling to students who are traumatized by the Israeli assault on Gaza. The university forced the student to take the counseling, online counseling services down. In Israeli violence against Palestinians in the West Bank later on, among those killed was a student in George Washington University, a Palestinian student, and another volunteer, if I remember correctly, there were two of them, both attending George Washington University, who were killed. And again, those students and other medical professionals who were not students but actual medical workers tried to provide counseling to Palestinian students who were affected either as friends or as family. And again, George Washington University ordered the services to be taken down. So, an organization called Palestine Legal filed a complaint with the Civil Rights Division in the Justice Department, complaining about George Washington's violation of the civil rights of its Palestinian students by consistently refusing to allow mental health counseling to Palestinians affected by Israeli violence. George Washington's defense is most fascinating and tells you how people of power think that they can construct reality the way they see fit, not far from the Emirati model, not far from the Saudi model, not far from the Israeli model, when it basically tells us it is a peace-loving nation that is a democracy as it perpetuates an apartheid against Palestinians. George Washington University said, well, the reason we have taken down these efforts to provide counseling is because we do not support anti-Semitic acts. So apparently, when you provide counseling to a Palestinian student attending George Washington University who is traumatized by Israel's apartheid against Palestinians, or traumatized because Israelis killed a relative or a friend of his or hers, that's anti-Semitic. Final example. Some of you might know that Arkansas was among the states that passed a law that without a shadow of doubt violates standards of freedom of speech. Arkansas passed a law that said, if you want to do government, don't want to do business with the state government of Arkansas, you must vow, you must promise not to refrain or to boycott or in any way honor a boycott of Israel for whatever reason. So, if you, whatever your business is, if you decide that you're offended by Israeli annexation of Palestinian land, by the Israeli apartheid against Palestinians, by the fact that Israelis kill on average a Palestinian a day, if not more, and injure scores more, if you are offended by that and decide that you will not do business with Israel, then your punishment is you cannot do business with the government of Arkansas. Well, an owner of a newspaper in Arkansas said, I'm not boycotting Israel. In fact, I have never boycotted Israel. And I have no intention of boycotting Israel. However, it is a violation of my constitutional rights to promise to sign an oath or a commitment in order to do business with my own government, state government. That's a violation of my freedom of speech. My government is saying, if you want to get a job with us, to do any type of business, including the owner of a newspaper, including have the state advertise in your newspaper, you must pledge not to engage in certain expressive activity, like buying or refusing to buy from a state, a foreign state. These laws have typically been struck down as unconstitutional, except recently, a circuit court sitting en banc meaning not just 3 members of the circuit court, but all judges of that circuit court, upheld the Arkansas law and said that it is not a violation of freedom of speech. The civil rights UCLA took the case, appealed that decision, upholding that law to the Supreme Court. And recently, the Supreme Court denied review, meaning it is allowing the ruling of the appellate court upholding the constitutionality of that Arkansas law to stand. By denying cert, the Supreme Court effectively is allowing for this precedent to live on. In my mind, we didn't get to the point, if you grew up a Muslim in the 60s and 70s, leave alone even before then, the psychology that teaches you to accept what is wrong, the psychology that allows you to live, to see only the razzle and dazzle of Dubai and Abu Dhabi and to hardly notice the sexually abused and the sexually trafficked and the forced labor, the psychology that allows you to accept from Kaaba to the Mukaab, the psychology that allows you to accept all types of sex workers flooding, as they did with Dubai, flooding from Eastern Europe to now the Holy Land in Saudi. because that is the future of Neom. What do you think Neom is going to be? What do you think the Mukaab in Riyadh is going to be? It is the same model that we've already witnessed in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. The psychology of incremental disempowerment and increasing apathy and increasing vanity and increasing small-mindedness and ever-increasing selfishness and self-centeredness, where you live perfectly happy to be deluded. Go ahead, construct my virtual reality. And as a Muslim, go ahead, as long as I have a house that looks fancy in the United States, as long as I have the pretense of security because I get a paycheck, as long as I have the nice comforts of life, I will pretend that I am a good Muslim. I will pretend that the fact that I pray and fast is enough. I will engage in this delusion and perpetuate this delusion to the point that George Washington University can do what it does. If it did this to Jews, there would be an uproar to no end. In fact, if it did this to most ethnic groups, there would be an uproar to no end, denying mental health services because providing mental health services is apparently racist, anti-Semitic. You can only do this to Muslims, and you can only get away with doing this only to Muslims. Or something like the Arkansas law, a clear violation of freedom of speech and constitutional rights, and yet all the right-wing organizations are all too happy to jump on the wagon whenever it comes to branding Muslims as the people of darkness who are incapable of understanding freedom of speech, are all silent, the silence of graves and death when it comes to the Arkansas law. Not a peep, not a protest. The ACLU, when it appealed the matter to the Supreme Court, did it as a lone organization, completely isolated in a lonely and ill-funded path. You wouldn't think that Muslims are among the richest people on the face of the earth if you saw how lonely the path when the ACLU appeals such a horrible precedent to the Supreme Court. Are there Muslim lawyers everywhere? Absolutely. There are tons of Muslim lawyers now. What are they focused on? Making money, perpetuating their virtual reality, living in their virtual reality homes, with their virtual reality electronics, with their make-believe little discussions on the net, with their petty grievances and debates and arguments that pretend that the real world doesn't exist. We have all fallen in the trap of the Emirati form of Islam. An Islam that will pretend that we can resolve theological differences while we ignore real suffering in the world. While the true Islam came to say, respect each other's differences and focus on the confronting of suffering in the world. Allahumma afu anna. Allahumma aghfir lana. Allahumma arhamna. Allahumma ahdina li aqraba min hadha rashada ya Ali ya azim. Allah forgive our sins. Bless our past. Grant us the right path. Grant us the path of morality and righteousness and ethics and virtue. Ya Rabbal Alameen. وصلي وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ونتبع بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وأقم الصلاة.